Blood Elves made their debut in Warcraft 3 expansion, The Frozen Throne. And pretty much in that story, we saw the High Elves were in pretty bad shape since their homeland had been destroyed by the Undead Scourge. And their leader at the time, Prince Kael'thas, rose up to figure out a way of how to cure his people of their magical addiction. And his solution to that was pretty much enslaving his people to the demon Illidan, who in turn for their service promised to teach them how to sate their magical addiction and become very powerful.
I think it's interesting to note about the Blood Elves that they have a rich history in Warcraft lore. They used to be High Elves, and High Elves were part of the Alliance. If you played Warcraft 3, your sorcerers and priests were High Elves. So it's interesting to see them on the other faction at this point. It's also interesting to note that Lady Sylvanas Windrunner was once a High Elf and therefore a Blood Elf, and she's on the Forsaken now. After she regained her will from Arthas, she led the Forsaken Crusade, and now you've got the Blood Elves naturally allied with the Horde through Lady Sylvanas Windrunner. So I think there's some really interesting story elements going on there.
In the Burning Crusade expansion set, we see the Blood Elves, a few years later, have indeed embraced Illidan's path and become very powerful, but they've definitely lost their souls, and that's a major theme that plays out through the quest lines.
What we tried to do with the quests was naturally guide the player through Blood Elf lore and catch the player up with why are the Blood Elves here? Why are they on the Horde? Why is it important for this expansion, the Burning Crusade, to have Blood Elves involved? Some of the earliest quests for the Blood Elves, for example, involve using the racial ability.
Every race in our game has some specific racial abilities that sort of make that class, that race unique. What we did with the Blood Elves is we focused on the kind of vibe that we've built for them, that they're this race that's very addicted to magic, that they can't get enough of it. So both in selecting primarily classes that are mana-oriented classes, and then by also selecting racial abilities that emphasize magic. For example, the mana tap ability that all Blood Elves have that allows them to kind of sap mana from the target and also build up a little bit of a buff that leads into their next ability, which is Arcane Torrent. And Arcane Torrent kind of sucks all the magic in the area around them, silencing nearby targets, and kind of restores some energy or some mana for that character. So what we've done is we've tried to focus on abilities that reinforce those themes that we've developed for the Blood Elves.
Blood Elf Paladin was quite an interesting one to talk about, in terms of lore especially. So they refer to themselves as Blood Knights, even though they are paladins. They cannot embrace the light. Rather, they see the light as this thing for them to manipulate.
We thought the game would play a lot better at the highest ends if that class option was available for the Horde. So as we sat around trying to figure out, well, this is certainly a break in the lore, how the hell are we going to rationalize this one? We came up with a pretty cool hook, which was Blood Elves overall kind of lost their faith in the light following the events of Warcraft 3. The undead had ruled their kingdom, and the light wasn't there for them in their darkest hour. It was, but they didn't use it very well. And so in their bitterness, they kind of turned from the light, and the prospect of them stealing the light or bending it to their will really meshed with their kit.
Their personality really fit that faction, kind of cursed on the inside. But at the same time, they are relatively, attractive race. At a glance, they kind of might not look like they fit on there, but when you play the game and you get into their quests and their story and you start seeing more of their emotes and sort of the subtleties of the race, you'll really see that, yeah, they obviously fit on the Horde.
A lot of the High Elf architecture, as we understand it, was held together by magic. The High Elves, or the Blood Elves, as we see them now, are dependent on, their whole culture is dependent on magic. And the Sunwell was the source of that magic, and when the Sunwell was destroyed, the architecture that was being held together by this magic started to fall apart. So part of their main city, Silvermoon, half of it is completely abandoned and run down because there's no more magic left to hold these buildings into place. And the buildings that they have taken over and remain standing in pristine order, they're using demonic energies to maintain the architectural structures.
The Blood Elf exterior zones are very unique because they're the first exterior zones that we built for the expansion. So we were learning some lessons along the way, but I think that we tried to do a pretty good job in making something different for players than they've experienced before. And the main thing about that stands out is Silvermoon City. Silvermoon City is the home city for the Blood Elf race, so the Horde was finally able to get its giant grand city.
So Silvermoon City is a great example of one of these areas. It has the pristine area which the Blood Elves have been rebuilding and was untouched from Arthas. There's the dead scar that goes right through the center of the city and is complete and utter devastation. Then the ruins of Silvermoon, which have been abandoned, they got cut off by the Scourge, so they haven't bothered to rebuild that. They just moved everybody over to the pristine side.
We decided to take one half and make it the city proper, and take the other half and turn it into what we call like a sub-zone, which is a small area that we expect players to quest and adventure in. And that's where we send players on early in the game. So they go through there, they play a couple quests, and then they exit out into the rest of Eversong, which would be the rest of the actual Blood Elf zone. Well, Sunstrider Isle plays a pretty big history into the Blood Elves because originally they've been there for a long time, but they've been pushed there. Originally they were out over the rest of Eversong, a little bit of the Ghostlands, but over time they've been oppressed and pushed back. So for us, it always works out really great to have a small starting area because we can keep the players, not necessarily enclosed, but we can keep them where we want for quests. And for a lot of people who are just learning how to play the game. They're level 1, they're level 3, so tend to not want them to get too far off a road or get stuck in a dungeon they might not want to be in. So doing an island like that that's connected right off the edge of the coast plays really well to that aspect for us.
For the Blood Elf outfits, we wanted to pull from some of the same designs that are prevalent in the rest of their environments. A lot of their designs are really regal and pretty. There's a lot of gold, intricate filigree, and a lot of primary colors, reds, purples.
The main influences with the Blood Elf items and weapons would be kind of similar to what their outfits were, which was that they're these very kind of like supermodel type people and more of a clean race. So taking that sort of thing into consideration would be just, the color scheme, the warm color scheme, the things that kind of key into that character type. They're very much like a red and a gold color scheme, like kind of red bases with gold accents. So we always want to kind of hammer that home and make sure that that's a very primary part of what makes up their weapons and all the stuff they're doing.
We're trying to kind of make it seem like the Blood Elves are the evolution of Night Elves. They are, the step up. They've kind of evolved. They were, in love with magic, and they had this lust for magic. So they kind of shied away more from the traditional Night Elf feel. So the differences are, they are definitely a lot more dynamic. Maybe not very gymnast or very flowing. But a lot more stronger looking in terms of posing, and their posture, their silhouettes, are definitely strike a little bit more dynamic feel to them. They're definitely more humanoid looking. They don't really have any dangly parts or holes in their faces or huge horns or anything. A lot of people who like the aesthetics and the look of the Night Elves will definitely like the Blood Elves.
Yeah, the dance is pretty obvious, I think. The animators kind of surprised all of us with that one.
The male dance, we did Napoleon Dynamite, and in the movie Napoleon Dynamite, there's a scene where Napoleon does a really funky dance routine on stage in front of his high school. So we picked 4 or 5 routines or steps out of that and created the animations from it. The Blood Elf female, we're playing with the idea of a
kind of pop culture dance. So we took Britney Spears videos and kind of picked apart steps from several of her videos.
What I hope for the player to take away from the Blood Elf experience is a sense of identity.
Am I evil or am I a good race? Because I think we kind of leave it on the edge there.
A sense of identity for being a Horde character, but a very different Horde character from what they've previously known. Completely different from any kind of Alliance character, because again, the race is a pretty race. They're all beautiful. The women and men of the Blood Elves are beautiful races, beautiful creatures, but there's more to them than that. Who are you? What are you? What do you want?
One of the difficulties with the Draenei is that you can't just summarize them inside of, a 4-minute speech. They're not a one-sentence group, and it's something we've known about since we decided on, using them as the new Alliance race. We had series villains like Archimonde and Kil'jaeden that are from this race called the Eredar. Big giant demons, right? Kind of a no-brainer for, a demonic race to lead the Burning Legion. And as we were kind of staring at those models and looking at that concept art, as we were kind of struggling to find the perfect Alliance race to add, that form just kind of came back to us again and again. These guys just look awesome. Trip out, wouldn't it be crazy if we had a lawful good version of these guys, if maybe they weren't always evil? Draenei originally came from the world of Argus. That's the home world of the Eredar race. And again, Draenei means exile, so we're dealing with one very specific tribe that was driven out and has managed to survive all these generations. Their experience is more on a cosmic scale. They know more than any other race we've encountered about the Burning Crusade, about the Naaru and the Legion and the Titans and all of these cosmic forces playing out. So, with the juxtaposition of a very evil-looking form, but a very noble cause and a very noble ideology, Draenei was a fun experiment to play with.
With the Draenei, we wanted to create a very heroic kind of theme for them. They kind of pose. They're very striking. They have good posture. They're the ultimate good guys in the universe, and they're here to save the day. So they sort of strike these Superman poses every once in a while.
Their proponents or their matrons are the Naaru. The Naaru are these massively powerful kind of celestial beings. They're pretty much the angels of the Warcraft universe. Classically, the Draenei have been attempting to become more like the Naaru. They exemplify their altruism. They are empowered by their light.
If anything, the Draenei are probably more pure and good than any other race in the Alliance.
They're definitely more far out than the classic archetypes we've been using so far.
So when creating the Draenei, we wanted to create something that was a little otherworldly. He's got blue skin, he's got interesting proportions, he's got a tail, the females have horns.
The Draenei have a rune on their head, so it exists for making them look really cool.
That actually is called the Mark of the Naaru. It's a blessing placed on their forehead. The way it should be playing out is when you use your racial ability, that'll come into effect and signify that you are indeed light-touched.
We wanted to make it feel like the Draenei were always part of the Warcraft universe.
So the Draenei's beginning areas were a pretty unique challenge because we were trying to build a place for a new race to start, but we didn't really have any real estate.
When the Draenei ship, the Exodar, crashed, it sort of scattered all over the place. So there are multiple crash sites throughout northern Kalimdor.
And they basically landed on 2 islands that are off the coast of Darkshore, south of Teldrassil. And these islands we separated out. We have one as a 1 to 10 playable zone, and the other is our 10 to 20.
So in Amon Vale, it's sort of a crashed part of the Exodar, and the Draenei are kind of throwing stuff together, and they're just sort of trying to make this their temporary home. And you'll notice there's crates and boxes everywhere. They're sort of setting up camp.
I think what punctuates the Draenei starting experience is the fact that there's a sense of urgency. Right away, you realize that you're part of some catastrophe or something really important. there are a lot of injured people around. It's up to you to help heal fallen Draenei who aren't doing as well as you are. You have to figure out what the situation has done to the surrounding environments.
They've crashed on Azeroth while they were trying to escape from Outland. Their craft that they were on basically got hijacked by Blood Elves and crash landed.
So, what we discover in Blood Mist is that the Blood Elves have an actual contingency inside the area, and they're facilitating the corruption that's spreading from the power core, which is the Exodar's power core.
You're not really going to have to think a lot about what you're going to need to do. The quests will seem to make sense to you because they fit the lore.
Usually with a zone or a race, I always like to look at something that you've seen in the world, like this zone needs to look like a Tibetan monastery, or this zone needs to look like a redwood forest. Well, the tricky thing with the Draenei, they came from another planet. We really had nothing to base the Draenei on.
So your first encounter with the Draenei architecture is in Almond Vale, and that's just a small fragment of your giant ship that crashed, and which is in fact a small section of even a larger ship that you'll find out about later in the game.
We decided early on that the Draenei would have a lot of crystal energy and crystal-related architecture that would be infused or bound in their architecture.
Where those crystals came from and why they're there and what role they play in the story is all something that will eventually unfold in the game.
We came up with something that you couldn't really identify as anything that relates to this planet.
As you progress in the game as a Draenei, you'll start to see a little bit more of their themes come through with their armor and their clothes. A lot of their items and weapons and their clothing have these crystals on them, which are prevalent in their ship and their architecture.
I'd say you play like newer games and their weapon designs may be really cool looking, but as a gamer, if you can't make a connection, you don't really appreciate what the weapon does.
Draenei incorporate a lot of crystals and stone of like almost metallic kind of nature into their items, armor.
The Exodar is the crashed craft that the Draenei came down onto Azeroth on, and it's buried halfway into the side of a mountain.
Yeah, walk into Exodar the first time, you're like, what the hell is this?
As far as looks go, it looks completely amazing. It's just a whole new art style than we've ever kind of tackled before, and I think it really stands out on its own as a city. All of their operations that they're trying to still figure out what happened, why did they crash here, what are they going to do? I think the centerpiece of all of that is here at the Exodar.
With the Draenei, we wanted to create something that you would never expect to see in World of Warcraft, while at the same time, it couldn't look too far out that no one could relate to it. I think we struck a pretty good balance with it.
What we want the players to come away with from the Draenei experience, that they've taken on the main heroic role for their people, that they're kind of at the forefront of that.
What happened to my race? How did I end up here? Where do I want to go?
We want to give them that identity, but we want to give them that purpose.
We're extremely happy with the way the Draenei came out. Very unique look.
We could have done a lot of things. We could have added, ogres and goblins and naga. There's all sorts of cool races in Warcraft that I want to get to one day, and that would be a lot of fun to play. All these races have cool, histories and a lot of character, but Draenei felt like a radical choice. It's definitely not the same thing. Even Blood Elves, as whack as they are, being part of the Horde, not as radical an argument, but Draenei, you gotta be crazy to even try that. And I dig that. We went kind of crazy with it. We'll have to see how it plays out. It's definitely not old hat fantasy. There's nothing Tolkien-esque about Outland, and that's what I dig about it. It's just kind of a breath of fresh air. And while it looks really funky, right, planets spinning in the background, the twisting nether, just these crazy zones of floating continents out in space, it holds together pretty well.
Hellfire Peninsula is the first zone that players will experience when they travel up to Outland through the Dark Portal. Basically, you'll see a landmass just ripped apart from all of the devastation that's taken place on Draenor. And this is Outland. When you walk through that Dark Portal, we are defining Outland in that moment.
Outland was new territory. We would come to meetings, and we're usually expecting some kind of outline from Metzen, and he would come to meetings and say, well, okay, what do you guys want to do here? And I'm like, well, I don't know what's going on with this zone. And Metzen would be like, I have no idea either. We've never done anything here before, so let's just go crazy.
Initially, we call this the crazy times. We have some times where we'd come up with some interesting far out ideas about how or why these would work, and we basically just iterate upon it to a point where it makes sense in the storyline and we're all happy with it. When we're all happy with it, we just set it in there. It's set in stone at that point. It's in the World of Warcraft lore encyclopedia at that point. But the lore is insanely important. It's immensely important.
You know, we joke about, the epic scale of a lot of the things in our game, but sometimes to really get the point across of, what you should feel like as a player, the epic nature of this expansion, I think it all sort of is defined by that portal.
The orcs in the Dark Horde era, when they first became the Horde and they were planning on, you know what, let's go conquer other worlds, right? They built big. They built to last. They built it to be something that, stirred the warrior heart as they're marching off in these giant columns down the path of glory, They were going to go conquer a world, and they wanted the doorway, through which they entered that world to be as grand as possible.
The thing that struck us the most was the materials that they would build with. This is more or less their home planet. The orcs sort of invaded Azeroth, and so when they came through the portal back in the day, they didn't bring a lot of their original materials with them. When we were looking and thinking about the Outland orcs, they would have had a lot more materials, a lot more refined tools and things like that to construct their elements with, and so we were able to work in a lot more metals and more interesting architecture, more solid architecture, not so pieced together. It was much more purposeful and military in style. It was very hardcore, just overbearing. They wanted to make sure that their presence was known and felt on that planet, and so when we looked at that, we sort of ran with that theme. It's such an iconic thing. I mean, everybody's seen it for the last 2 years on the start screen, this small dark portal, so we wanted to expand on that and show them what this expansion is all about.
Hellfire supports, an alliance base and a horde base themselves with some pretty cool stories. It definitely, the breadth of the zone allows us to tell stories and create quest lines that are evocative of that Warcraft 2 expansion set and the whole history of the Alliance and the Horde in this area.
For us to express, we wanted to really play off to the history of the zone. We're doing a lot of new zones here that players might not have heard of and not have seen, but Hellfire is one that kind of hits home because it's really got a lot more lore involved in it.
Lore and quests are extremely important. Every quest we do has to go through Chris Metzen, our creative director. No matter how small, we pass by whatever quest we can, and we try to tie in the lore to almost every quest. We really do want to make that as part of the backbone, the foundation of any quest.
All of those thought processes sort of came together to form Hellfire Citadel, as you see it now.
Hellfire Citadel's got a really unique silhouette, so on the horizon when you're walking up to it, it's in the middle of a canyon. It really stands out.
Hellfire Citadel was based a lot on previous orc architecture. Obviously, the old world orcs are the ones that sort of inhabit this. So we looked a lot at the existing orc architecture that we have in the World of Warcraft. But then we also had to think about exactly what would differentiate Outland orcs from the orcs that inhabit Azeroth.
Hellfire Citadel is our first 5-man dungeon that players will be experiencing in the expansion. It's a winged dungeon, which for anyone that played the original game will remember as Scarlet Monastery.
I think one of the first wings that the artist completed was the military wing, and it looks awesome. It's you'll see regiments of orcs, fell orcs marching around. You'll see armaments and battlements and weapons all stacked up. These guys are ready for battle, and it really comes across in the environment of the dungeon. It's it's a relatively dark section of the dungeon. A lot of heavy red underlighting. You've got these giant burning cauldrons sort of hanging from the ceiling. They're sort of their defensive battlements that maybe they could turn down and open up on people. A lot of heavy chains, and it's just got this super oppressive military kind of theme to it.
One wing is basically revolves around the demons and the warlocks, orcs that live there and created the citadel. We have another one where all of the orcs are being trained, and that one is we call it the military wing, where they're training them to get ready to go back to battle. And then the third wing is the ramparts wing, and the ramparts is basically where you get to fight up on the ledges and the battlements all around the citadel, but not necessarily inside of it.
A lot of work goes into building a zone like Hellfire Peninsula.
And we always want to top ourselves. We want to make things a lot better than the original Warcraft, World of Warcraft. So we're happy.
And I think that for any player, we're going to very much satisfy that craving for more World of Warcraft, and not only supply more, but supply some new and different stuff that they've never seen before.
Because it's cool. Because Epic is cool.
We wanted to hit you over the head with something you've never seen before.
And it's going to be cool. It's like a whole new game. I can't wait.
Well, I think music's really important for video games. Ultimately, audio is a huge part of the immersiveness of any virtual space, any game space. And I think specifically a lot of the personality of the Warcraft setting, very specifically the game World of Warcraft, has been defined by its kind of audioscape.
The music is not meant to be noticed, it's meant to be felt. Typically in a film, you have one composer. That is often true in the game world, but in this case, World of Warcraft is so vast, there's certainly a very practical reason to have more than one composer. In Running Minutes, there is more music in the Draenei and Blood Elf starting areas alone than in the entire original product that was released in 2004. It took 3 on-staff composers plus some contributions from one of our sound effects staff, and we actually worked with an outside composer on a particular subset of music that was a good match for his talents. An orchestra is so unique in its sound, and while the modern synthesizer and samplers can bring back pretty good memories of an orchestra, side by side there's no contest in terms of expressiveness and musicality and emotion conveyed. I wrote a piece of music for the Blood Elf starting area, and the more I got into it, as I began feeling it come together, I noticed how lyrical the melody sounded. It seemed like something you could sing.
Russell asked me to help him out with some of the lyrics for his Blood Elf music, and that's something that's written in Galatian.
The vocalist that we were discussing, the song, it was a beautiful, haunting soprano.
She looked at it, she listened to what we had to say, she put the music up, And in one take, she had us on the floor, just sobbing. It was so, it was just so touching. Derek and I sat down and we discussed the 2 new races and whether or not we could find a vocabulary for each race.
Something like the Draenei, where it's a race that we've never heard before, we've never seen before. You have this race that travels on an interdimensional ship. Their ship is populated with crystals, and I could imagine them growing up around these vibrating crystals, and so I began to formulate these ideas that their cultural music would be something that would revolve around singing and making these harmonic tones as if they were raised around vibrating musics and tones and things like this. So that sort of became the foundation of the music.
When you first come into Hellfire, you hear the kind of surf guitar textures that no one, if you told them to, would think could ever work in the WoW universe and could definitely not work for an opening scene. And for me, it's been a lot of fun trying to get those kind of textures, which nobody would expect. Nagran, because it is so pastoral, was an opportunity to do a lot more of the kind of sweet orchestral sound that we had in the original release. The part of Terrakar Forest that's been kind of destroyed and has become kind of one large cemetery, I really tried to key into just trying to capture that kind of brittle, lifeless feeling and menacing at the same time.
Sound is a big, broad brush with as much potential as the visuals, as the story, and as the gameplay to affect your experience as a player.
The identity of the Warcraft setting is hugely based in how it sounds, in the humor of the creature responses, the ferocity of the monsters, just the ambience, of every zone. You're walking through Thousand Needles and kind of hearing the wind roar, or rolling through Swamp of Sorrows, or Dust Wallow and hearing the dripping critters out there in the swamp. It really kind of creates a huge sense of immersion and realism.
The sound effects can tell those stories either right in front of you, they can do it from around a corner, they might tell you something about a room before you even enter it. There's this kind of mid-level where the sounds are meant to be noticed on occasion, but don't necessarily interact with you in any way.
In the Burning Crusade, if you were to ask what makes sound, pretty much the entire game. I mean, you're looking at things that you don't see. You have ambience, you have music, you have monsters, you have little objects all over the world. All of these make sound, and until we get to them and make sound, it's a silent world. I think a great sound designer also is able to create sounds that people never even know they're hearing, because it blends in so perfectly with what's going on in the world. It doesn't stand out, and it just becomes, that's what that object sounds like. A sound designer is responsible for creating all aspects of the game with sound. Anything that's silent, we put sounds on it.
Sonically bringing the world to life.
With today's technology, it allows sound designers just to go everywhere. I mean, we can take almost anything and make something out of it.
Yeah,
scraping metal
absolutely.
And turn it into like a gushing wind blowing bug or something.
And that's the most attractive aspect, I think, of sound design, is this ability to take sounds that most people wouldn't normally consider as being whatever it is that they're experiencing or looking at, and you're layering all these things and making something out of them that's completely different.
We'll often do it here at the office in our studios, or we'll go to a big Foley house in Hollywood and someone who has a really great room full of Foley props so that we can have lots of stuff to use. And we'll have a huge list of things that we need to get, and we'll basically spend the whole day there just making noise. We usually go out and find some interesting place to record, or we have a preconceived notion of something we need in the game, and we'll need to grab source effects for it, so we'll do some research sometimes. That becomes necessary if we need something that's really hard to find. And then we'll just take a road trip, or hop on a plane, or just go down the street and record some stuff out in the field somewhere that we're going to bring back and manipulate in some way. We've had the opportunity to work with some really amazing animals, including lions and tigers and bears.
Did Joseph talk to you about the pigs?
He talked to me about the pigs. I filmed him with
Did
the
you
pigs.
film him recording the pigs?
I filmed Joseph recording the pig.
I think definitely this time around with sound effects in the game, we've just added so much more. I think the content overall in the Burning Crusade makes up a soundtrack that goes beyond what you would ever imagine. I think people will really be surprised with, the sound effects that we've really put into making this come to life.
A lot of the VO, more than just what they say and the actual written dialogue of what the races say, it communicates so much about their physicality and about their presence in the game setting.
It's typical, for instance, for dialogue to be fairly obvious. A character speaks, you understand, you process it, and it causes some reaction. Or it could be more subliminal. It could be creepy. It could be almost unintelligible to the point that it's almost a sound effect, and yet it contributes to your sense that a particular boss is more powerful than the last one. Or maybe you've reached the end game of the instance that you're in.
The better turn away, little girl. Run away.
We have a writer, we have an historian, and we have Chris Metzen. Those three people all contribute to every line of dialogue that goes into the game.
You need to know who to bring in for the auditions. How old do they need to be? Does it need to be a male? Does it need to be a female? What kind of voice do they need to have? Low, gruff, high, shrill. All kinds of different variations that you can have. Like a goblin, for instance, will be a high-pitched voice and really insane and wacky, or you could have an orc, which is a low, gruff voice and almost Klingonish.
So at that point, I basically start checking against pre-existing lore. Try and make sure that it all makes sense and weaves together to make a really great story. Because that's our chief goal. We love to do the story, bring it across and make it come to life.
So the act of casting voices in a game like this, it becomes pretty important. There are so many different voices that we need to have a variety.
We audition the actors, we find the best actors for the best roles, we match them up, and then after that it's time to bring them in to record. Yeah, a couple more like that last one.
The depths will consume you.
Nice, let's get one more.
me. But don't let me pull the wool over your eyes. See for yourself what lies beneath those covers. And now, on with the show!
We tried to put as much voice response in there as we could so that the player felt completely immersed in the universe. So they're constantly getting some kind of audio feedback and they feel like this is a living world that they're part of.
Imprisoned for 10,000 years. Banished from my own homeland. And now you dare enter my realm. You are not prepared. Imprisoned for 10,000 years. Banished from my own homeland. And now you dare enter my realm. You are not prepared.
Hey, I'm Nick Carpenter, and I am the creative director for Blizzard Cinematics, and today we're going to be taking a look at the two new player races, the Draenei and Blood Elf, and we're going to be taking an inside look at the Blood Elf shot and pretty much breaking it down and give you guys an inside look. One of the things that was really cool for us in this particular piece is we were able to show the Blood Elf at the beginning, where she looks pretty much like any character on the good side of Warcraft, pretty much on the Alliance, where she feels calm, mundane, and then as the shot progresses and the Mana Worm comes in, you get to see a darker side of her, which is pretty much the nature of the Blood Elf race. And we actually got to do that with the Draenei. At the opening of the Draenei shot, he's in dark and he's shrouded and it's heavy lighting, and then he comes and steps into the light, which reveals him to be an actual good character. The Draenei Paladin is actually the same race as Archimonde, and if you guys are familiar with Archimonde, he was the bad character in Warcraft 3. So it's really cool for us to sort of see these polar opposites in these characters and really explore that in this particular cinematic. Okay, so this is the Blood Elf shot, WA40, and we're pretty much gonna just break it down. So the first part is drawn, which is your traditional 2D storyboard, and it's pretty much done like everyone else. It gives us an idea of where we're going and the pacing. And from there, we go out and film live action reference for the animators, so they can get a basic understanding of motion and timing and pacing. And from there, we go into what's called a 3D animatic, which is sort of a blend between 3D and 2D in terms of storytelling, and it basically gives us a physical world representation of exactly what we're going to be seeing in the shot. And once we have that, it's pretty much laid out, and then we go straight into first pass animation. And first pass is usually just a quick stab at exactly what we're seeing in the live action reference. And then from there, we just keep polishing it until the shot is final.
Hello, I'm Jeff Chamberlain. I was the director of this cinematic, and I'd like to introduce you to WA25. It's the Troll and Raptor shot. The Scar is an area where the undead marched from Deathholm to Silvermoon City, and they left a path of destruction on the way. And we decided to route our shot there. In many of our shots, we decided to place them in an area that's actually in the game. And we thought that this area was worthy of putting one of our shots in. We decided to do a Troll and Raptor because, one, it's a very cool combination of mount and rider. Two, because in our department, there are quite a few dinosaur enthusiasts, one in particular who decided to take it upon himself to really take this shot to the level that it's at. In this project, we did a lot more 2.5D projection backgrounds. And what that means is a combination of 3D geometry and 2D painted, hand-painted imagery. We switched over from 3D to 2.5D because we had a short production schedule and a lot of backgrounds to generate. We also figured we'd have a lot more control over the imagery by just hand-painting it. The problem with that is, in order to get the background to really, read true, you have to project it onto low poly 2D geometry. And then the problem with that is that the 2D geometry might not represent fully the scale and detail of the background. So there's a lot of trickery involved and a lot of full of the eye techniques, but we really dialed it in and hope that we achieved the goal that we wanted. I believe it's there.
I'm Matt Samia. I head up the cinematics group, and I also participated a bit in directing this show. I'd like to talk a bit about the sheeping shot. So in the game, obviously, one of the cooler things you can do is turn your opponent into a sheep. And one aspect of it that's really, it really makes it cool in the game is it's somewhat humorous, right? I mean, it's just funny. It's a cool thing to do because it makes you giggle, right? So we thought, why not get a bit of that into our intro? What makes this game really special and interesting is there is an underlying humor in a lot of ways, and so we wanted to start to get that, start to bring that aspect into what we're doing here, and see if it doesn't resonate with the players a bit. So it turns out that modeling a sheep, creating a sheep in CG is not actually as straightforward as you might think. It had to meet several criterion. One is it has to look like a sheep. The other is it has to strike a balance between reality and fantasy, and it has to just be kind of funny. So we went through several hairstyles trying to find what is the optimal sheep haircut going to be for this shot, and well, settled on the one that seemed to work the best.
Greetings, I am Wolfgang Amadeus Wiffleball. I am the director of Ultramarionation here at Blizzard Entertainment. When Blizzard needed a reference for a tauren turning into a sheep, they had to turn to me, the foremost authority on marionation in the world. Ultramarionation, it is puppetry for the 21st century. We use only the finest puppets, the finest materials. The strings, they are now nano-microfibers. They are invisible to the human eye. Some people think, is this a real tauren? No, it is one of my finest marionettes.
One of the things that we wanted to do in this intro was to tie it into the last intro. We wanted to bring back some of the characters that we had seen previously. We wanted to get the mage back in there. We wanted to get the undead back in there. That's a couple of examples. But we wanted them to have been through some adventures in this world. We wanted them to have lived a bit. We wanted them to have some epic gear. So this is actually the same mage that we saw before. Difference is now he's got way cooler junk. He's actually got a haircut too, for some reason, that we can't quite explain. But other than that, he's the same guy.
Imprisoned for 10,000 years. Banished from my own homeland. And now you dare enter my realm. You are not prepared. You are not prepared!